Do you know that in most relationships, resentment is not caused by bad intentions? It's usually caused by unmet expectations. Today, we're going to be looking at unmet expectations in a relationship. And to help us understand unmet expectations in a relationship, we're going to focus on 3 key points. Number 1 is expectation versus agreement. Number 2, assumption versus communication. And number 3, we're going to be looking at healthy renegotiations. Number 1, we're going to look at expectation versus agreement. And when it comes to expectations, people sometimes assume that their expectations are known by their partner. And yet their partner may have no clue as to their expectation. And this is where agreement then becomes very important. The Bible actually says that can 2 walk together unless they be agreed. So where there is no agreement but the expectations, you will find that you'll be walking alone and your partner is not with you. Because why? Those expectations have not been agreed upon between the 2 of you. Because expectation is simply what you hold as true or what should be happening in your relationship based off of maybe your past experiences or your ideal of what a relationship should look like. So in most times people are frustrated, not because, the expectation itself is wrong, but because the expectation is either not spoken or it's unrealistic. So it's important to ensure that expectations are not left unspoken and they're also not unrealistic, that you both sit down and agree to the outcome or to the expectations so that the other person is also aware of what your expectations are. Sometimes, when you watch movies and whatnot, you see we've been influenced by so many things aside from just TV, family, society itself. So we have an idea of how a relationship should operate. So in most cases, people assume that the other person also has the same understanding. But the honest truth is, people sometimes, your partner may have no clue what your expectations are. And therefore, and I've heard people say, you should know by now, or if you had known me, you would know that this is what I like. And therefore, you are forcing your expectation to be met by someone who doesn't even know what the expectations are. And that's why it's important that in a relationship, nothing is left to just assumption, assuming that the other person knows exactly what your expectations are and hoping that they meet those expectations, even if they are unspoken. Yes, there may be a few things that maybe can be picked up, from unspoken word. Someone may just end up doing what they want to do. For example, if they do something nice that appears to be romantic, it could be because they learned about it. And if they happen to do something that is meaningful to you, then you would interpret that as love, for example. But if they keep doing something that they think in their view is love, but to you, you don't interpret it as love, then you will have a different view because your expectation is different from what they're giving you. And that's why I say that it is important that expectations are not left unspoken, that expectations are also not unrealistic, but they are communicated clearly so that it forms an agreement between you and your partner. Because if there is no clear agreement, you will find that you will be expecting one thing and they will be given another. Because why? There's no clear agreement. And therefore, sometimes when you see that expectations are not being met, it could be just an indicator that there is no agreement between the 2 of you, that you are walking or you're walking different paths, and if you came into agreement, you would simply come and walk in the same path together. So never leave your expectations unspoken, and also ensure that you sit down to clarify your expectations so that you can arrive at an agreement by helping your partner understand what your expectations are and how they are to meet those expectations. And sometimes it might feel like, do I have to voice out my expectations every time? But it may be vital that you actually verbalize those expectations, unlike just keeping quiet and hoping that your partner will understand what your expectations are. It's better to have that sit down and clearly communicate what your expectations are and let them also understand your point of view, and also come to an agreement as to how those expectations will be met. And with that said, I think I'll let my wife add in her wisdom to this.
Yes, Jeremiah 29:11 says, "For I know the thoughts that I have towards you." This is God speaking. "Thoughts of good and not evil, to bring you to an expected end." So here is God Almighty who has thoughts towards you, but he invites you and I to still let him know what we are expecting. What is our expectation? And God wants to bring us to that expectation, not because we're making an order, but hopefully our expectations align with his will. The point of me sharing Jeremiah 29:11 is that sometimes in relationships, I know for one, when I was single, I once dated somebody who told me, "You're expecting too much." And then I became fearful and I stopped sharing what I expected. And actually it was my expectation of wanting to get married. And sometimes we've been wounded in relationships and we end up in marriage that we are fearful to express our expectations. But I want to remind you that actually God himself, who is ruler of the universe, thinks it's important to know, what does Twila expect? What does Ben expect? So never be too fearful to express what your expectations are. Today we're talking about the fact that expectations are not what hurt the relationship or that they are wrong, but rather that what hurts the relationship is the unspoken or unrealistic expectations. So hopefully Jeremiah 29:11 has taken care of the unspoken expectations. Speak them out. If somebody's not ready to hear them, it doesn't mean they're wrong. It may just mean that they're not ready to hear them, and that's on them and not you. When it comes to unrealistic expectations, I've heard women expecting all manner of things. He needs to be paying for my hair, he needs to pay my nails, he needs to do this, and meanwhile the guy doesn't get paid much. How is he going to give you that is that realistic for the world that you're in, for the realm that you're in, for where your finances can stretch? So are we expecting blood out of a stone? Those are the things that hurt a relationship, and being mindful of that helps to make sure that our relationships are thriving and not being hurt because we haven't vocalized our expectations, or we are expecting something that is not yet tangible or real within the realms of where we're living.
Fantastic. And coming to point number 2, which is assumption versus communication. And I like the fact that, God being God, still had to communicate to say, I know the thoughts that I have. He still had to communicate, his expectation of us, and also our expectation of him. In fact, a book, the Bible is a book of what we should expect from the relationship that we have from God and what God expects from us. So there is clear communication. And that's why, for example, our Christian relationship is considered as a covenant. And a covenant is simply an agreement where people come together and, the relationship is operating based on clearly defined terms. There is no assumption. Everything is clearly communicated. So even in the case of God, we have the Bible that is communicating his thoughts, his hearts, and his expectation of us. And therefore, it should be the same for us, that we shouldn't assume anything. But if we are unclear of why maybe our expectations are not being met, it's okay to ask your partner to say, no, I'm expecting this, or I expected you to do this, so that they can then explain to you whether they knew of that expectation or what could actually be done. Because it could simply take you opening up your, letting them know the unspoken expectation. And you will find that maybe they will not even be resistant to meeting that expectation. But if it's left unspoken, this is where now you start to feel like, the other person doesn't care because they should know. But then all those are assumptions. It could be that, your partner simply doesn't know what your expectations are. And by simply being clear with your expectations and not being vague about your expectations, it could help your partner. And also on the part of communication, it is vital to ensure that you arrive at that agreement, because you can't arrive at an agreement without the avenue of communication. So communication is simply, these are my expectations, and your partner also needs to understand the role that they need to play in meeting those expectations. Because sometimes you'll find that you have an expectation and then come to realize that it's you to meet that expectation and not really your partner. And also, your partner needs to also know the level of involvement when it comes to that expectation. What are they expecting from you, or what is being expected of them in that particular scenario or in those expectations that you have. And you also assess together whether the expectation is both realistic. Realistic doesn't mean that it is out of this world. Realistic could simply mean that maybe in that particular time and season they can't meet the expectation, not because they don't want to, but the means are not there. The example that you gave, where a woman is expecting the guy to buy things that he can afford because his salary can't meet that expectation. So by clearly defining or communicating that expectation, your partner may also be able to tell you to say, no, based on, for example, how much I get paid, I can't meet this expectation. So it becomes unrealistic, not because it is wrong, but simply because the conditions that you're both in cannot allow for that expectation to be met. And at some other point, it could be met. You could want a brand new car, but then at the start of a relationship, both of you don't have enough money, cannot be met. But a few years later, when both of you are both established, you'll find that that same expectation becomes realistic. So it can move from being unrealistic to become realistic. So when we are talking about, communicating your expectation and them having to be realistic, it is just ensuring that both of you are on the same page so that you are moving the same direction. Because when you are just operating on the assumption that your partner, for example, doesn't want to buy you a new car, you would think that then they don't love you. But the honest truth could be that they just can't afford. And that's why then honesty in that communication is also important. Because then the reason for you guys speaking and sitting together is to come to a form of agreement that will be suitable to the both of you. That's why communication is there. So that, even when you see your partner maybe falling short of meeting that expectation, you can nudge them by reminding them or by bringing it up again so that, you can revisit that agreement once again. Is there anything that you'd like to add to this?
On assumption and communication, Titus 2 talks about the older women teaching the young women how to love their own husbands. Mm-hmm. And in the Zambian culture, we have a moment where the older women are teaching the young woman as she goes to get married. Similarly, the older men are coaching the young man as he is going to get married, maybe more so the woman. Mm-hmm. There's a story where the older women are always saying, watch out for the friends that say, hey, I saw your husband. He was hugging a young girl by the corner of the street, so-and-so, and, light-skinned, all this kind of stuff. Give description. And you as the wife run off with an assumption, my husband is having an affair. But equally, the older men will teach the man, the groom to be careful that when you say to your wife, I'm going to the shop to buy bread, that as little as it may be, if you go to the shop A that you told your wife, if there's no bread there and you decide I'm going to shop C, which is way off of your journey from home, mm-hmm. Tell your wife, there's no bread. I'm going to shop C, because between shop A and shop B, you finding there's no bread, you go over, somebody is going to see you. The woman he hugged may be a sister, a cousin, but he's talking to her and he hasn't got the chance yet to tell his wife, this is what happened. This is not about policing. It's scenarios that change in just the nature of time. And as a wife or a husband, you can assume based on the information that's come to you from outsiders without giving your spouse a chance to explain. Or if you're in a relationship, you're not yet married, you're courting, somebody comes and you're making assumption, or you've seen information yourself. Women, we're guilty sometimes of checking our partners' phones. Same with men, they do check our phones, and you see something and you make an assumption. So those assumptions are killing the relationship. But I also want to highlight on communication that communication is really important, and it's something that we all put on our CVs. Oh, I am good at communication, whether written or verbal. But communication is a very difficult thing to do. it's a process that you have to learn. Is something that I'm beginning to even learn for my own marriage. I'm beginning to see that when it comes to communication, Dr. Gary Chapman talked about it in his book, where a husband is showing and pouring love to his wife the way he understands, and she still demands a divorce because she's like, well, he doesn't love me, he's not giving me love the way that I understand it to be. This is in the love languages. So communication, it goes beyond just speaking words. Communication, when I'm communicating with him effectively, it goes beyond me saying how Twila hears it, how she understands it. That's a part of it, because I can't run away from Twila. This is me. That's how I process things. And I'm offering my explanation or communication about whatever we're talking about from that place. But it's also important that I'm mindful. How does he hear things? How does he receive things? And vice versa. He needs to understand, if my wife sees love expressed as this, for her, this is what it means. For me, it may mean something else. It's important that he gives it from the way Ben understands it, but also from the way that he has learned about me and how I understand what love means to me. When we hit that balance, we are hitting what is effective communication. So those key things are so important. And if you're effective communicators, by the time someone is saying, I saw your husband hugging a light-skinned, oh yeah, he told me, you shut that conversation down, even if he didn't tell you. Why? Because at some point there must be a good reason why he hasn't told me yet, and he will tell me. Or there must be a good reason why she hasn't mentioned this yet, and she will. So you give your friend the benefit of the doubt. But where those boundaries are missing, I think assumptions will go off rampant. They'll go running.
Very true, very true. And lastly, we're going to look at healthy renegotiation. And this is basically, the understanding that, as much as expectations are important, there are different seasons and there are different expectations. And sometimes your expectation could change. But then the change should not be left unspoken either. This should be communicated clearly so that both of you can make the readjustments that are necessary for that expectation to be met. Because if it's left unspoken, this is where, again, you are no longer walking in agreement, because the agreement is different. One is walking on a different agreement, and the other is still on the old agreement. And that's why this is important, that whenever anything changes with regards to your expectations, let these also be brought to the table to be renegotiated. And the purpose of renegotiating is not so that we can make our partners feel any type of way, but it's just to ensure that both of you remain on the same path. The goal of a good relationship is to forever remain in agreement so that you can continue walking together, because all these unmet expectations can cause someone to start going a different direction than the direction that initially was started. When the relationship was started, both of you were in agreement, and because of the agreement, you started what was called marriage. And for that relationship to continue on, the agreement has to remain as an important factor. And that's why you constantly have to communicate your expectation. And even if there's a change, you have to renegotiate the expectation so that the other party is equally aware and they can make the readjustments that are necessary for you to then still walk together. But where number one, your expectations are unspoken, it may break the agreement that's there. And also the other person might then starts to operate on assumption, because then what was agreed is no longer the agreement. So it means that now they're operating on assumption, thinking that, okay, if things are still the same, it means that we are operating this way, but yet there could be a change. And that's why it's very vital that, there is no assumption, but there's clear communication. And you both don't have to agree all the times, when it comes to expectation, because like we said, sometimes when it comes to meeting expectation, you may arrive at an agreement, but then you still find that your partner keeps breaking it. And I think you need to go back to the table, not to ask why the expectation is not being met, but also try and find out what could be the challenge in meeting that expectation. Because then if you just have one track mind, instead of looking at the holistic view as to why this expectation can't be met, then you could find that you are operating on assumption that your partner could, but they truly cannot. And that's why it's vital that your expectations are clearly communicated, and that should lead to an agreement. And number two, there are no assumptions, and communication is clear between the two of you, because there cannot be an agreement without communication. And lastly, there has to be healthy renegotiation. Both of you are in partnership. You're not, you're not single individuals anymore. You're operating as a unit. And in order for both of you to move forward, there has to be an agreement to say, let's move forward. But if there's no agreement, this is where one is moving backwards and the other one is moving forward. And there seems to be a tug of war between the two of you, because there's no clear agreement that helps you both to move forward as a unit. In under a minute, how would you conclude this unmet expectations in a relationship?
On the healthy renegotiation, the way I would conclude that is maybe for the couples who also need to be aware that for a healthy negotiation to happen, a healthy renegotiation atmosphere needs to be created. If any one of the partners doesn't feel comfortable, they feel fearful, they feel like they won't be heard because they've said it so many times about renegotiating an issue, and that they won't be heard, it will be difficult to get to that place of a healthy renegotiation. So it's up to both parties to really create that atmosphere, because as the relationship grows, as it develops, life will go through different seasons. There are people who started off together living in one city, and then the husband has to move away or the wife has to move away for work purposes, and things change, or health reasons, things change, somebody's gone to look after their parent. At all these different life milestones, or somebody's in full-time education, all these different life milestones require a healthy renegotiation checkpoint. But if at each of these checkpoints, any one of the couple, spouse or boyfriend or husband or wife, any one of you feels unsafe to bring up a conversation, a healthy renegotiation cannot happen. So I think building that atmosphere where you understand each other, you communicate, is a great way to start that healthy renegotiation.
Appreciate it. And if you've got any thoughts with regards to how we can, people can resolve unmet expectation in any relationship, please feel free to just comment, send us,
what's worked
a message.
for you.
Yeah, what's worked for you,
right?
And what wisdom would you be able to share with the rest of us? And we'll be able to share that wisdom, in the next future episodes that we have. With that said, appreciate it. We'll see you in the next episode.